Britain is experiencing one of its most dramatic demographic and economic shifts in centuries. While politicians speak of levelling up and regional regeneration, the harsh reality is that many towns face existential crises that threaten their very survival as viable communities by 2030. This isn't hyperbole, it's mathematics. When you combine plummeting birth rates, mass emigration of young people, collapsing high streets, vanishing industries, and severely reduced government funding, entire communities reach a tipping point from which recovery becomes virtually impossible. The statistics paint a chilling picture. Essential services are disappearing and being replaced by less vital ones, leading to a decline in overall quality of life for residents. Only 6% of towns experienced a decline in both population and employment between 2009 and 2019, but in the northeast, this figure rises to 14%, and relatively, 90% of towns in the northeast and northwest had population growth lower than the England and Wales average. What we're witnessing isn't just economic decline, it's demographic collapse. The latest UN forecasts suggest the world population is forecast to plummet in the coming decades, and the UK is already experiencing this trend in microcosm across its struggling former industrial heartlands. The 10 towns we'll examine represent different facets of this crisis: coastal resorts destroyed by changing holiday patterns, former mining communities left behind by deindustrialization, steel towns without steel, and new towns that never quite worked. Each faces unique challenges, but all share common threads: aging populations, youth exodus, economic stagnation, and the gradual withdrawal of essential services that make community life possible. These aren't just statistics on a spreadsheet, they represent the potential end of communities with centuries of history, the displacement of tens of thousands of families, and the transformation of once thriving urban centers into ghost towns. By 2030, current trends suggest these places will either be unrecognizable shadows of their former selves, or in some cases, effectively abandoned. Blackpool, once hailed as one of the wonders of the world by writer Thomas Luke, Blackpool today tells a story of spectacular decline that makes it the most at-risk major town in Britain. Blackpool's 2025 population is now estimated at 143,552. In 2001, the population of Blackpool was 148,300. Blackpool experienced a decrease of -1,455 residents over the past year, marking an annual decline of -0.2%. This decline masks a much deeper crisis. Today, Blackpool is the seventh most densely populated area in England outside of Greater London. The population is heavily concentrated in Blackpool's inner area, a very dense and grey urban environment characterised by guest houses, no longer required, which have been converted into rented bedsits and flats. The economic devastation is staggering. Gross value added is a measure of economic activity, and the 2016 result for Blackpool revealed a per head of population figure that was just 63.1% of the UK average. Region-wide, Trafford sees the highest median wages at £37,889, whereas Blackpool has the lowest at £24,571. What makes Blackpool's situation terminal is the perfect storm of factors converging simultaneously. The tourism industry that built the town has been in terminal decline since the 1960s. By the 1960s, the UK tourism industry was undergoing radical changes. The increasing popularity of package holidays took many of Blackpool's traditional visitors abroad. The construction of the M55 motorway in 1975 made Blackpool more feasible as a day trip rather than an overnight stay. But it's the social crisis that truly marks Blackpool as unsustainable. Blackpool has the highest number of children in care in England, at a rate of 218 per 10,000 children in the local authority's care. This represents more than 3 times the national average of 70 per 10,000. Blackpool also has the highest rate of deaths from drugs misuse in England. The infrastructure is crumbling. The local economy has suffered further from continued underinvestment in railway infrastructure by the government. This has made travel to Manchester and Liverpool and other cities difficult, resulting in fewer job opportunities for local residents. The town has experienced large reductions in central government funding for local services too. Between 2010 and 2017, core funding for Blackpool Council had the highest reduction out of any local authority in England. Without dramatic intervention, which seems increasingly unlikely given government priorities and fiscal constraints, Blackpool faces demographic and economic collapse by 2030. The combination of population decline, economic stagnation, social crisis, and infrastructure decay creates conditions from which recovery is virtually impossible. Middlesbrough's transformation from Ironopolis to one of Britain's most challenged towns represents one of the most dramatic urban reversals in modern British history. By 1851, Middlesbrough's population had grown from 40 people in 1829 to 7,600. By the mid-1870s, Middlesbrough was producing one-third of the entire nation's pig iron output. Today, the statistics reveal a town in demographic freefall. The population of Middlesbrough is 143,700. The population has increased by 2,400 in the past year. The population has decreased by 6,900 since 1981. However, this masks the real story. Between mid-2021 and mid-2022, net internal migration out of Middlesbrough was 1,936, and net international migration into Middlesbrough was 6,076. This reveals a critical pattern. British-born residents are fleeing Middlesbrough while being replaced by international migrants, creating a completely different demographic composition that often lacks the economic integration necessary for sustainable community development. The employment crisis is severe. The unemployment rate in Middlesbrough is 6.7%. The definition of unemployment is being economically active but unemployed. The average unemployment rate nationally is 3.8%. More alarming is the broader economic inactivity. Around 25,300 people, or 29.2% of the population aged 16 to 64 years, in Middlesbrough were economically inactive in the year ending December 2023. The demographic replacement happening in Middlesbrough, outward migration of established residents, coupled with inward migration of often disadvantaged international migrants, creates social cohesion challenges that compound economic problems. Without the economic opportunities to integrate new arrivals effectively, communities become fragmented and social capital deteriorates. Current trends suggest that by 2030, Middlesbrough will either be a fundamentally different place demographically and economically, or face such severe social and economic challenges that normal urban functioning becomes impossible. The infrastructure for a thriving industrial town remains, but the economic foundation that sustained it for 150 years has vanished, and nothing adequate has replaced it. Rhyl, perched on the North Wales coast, represents the tragic collapse of Britain's seaside tourism industry writ large. Once a bustling holiday destination for working-class families from Lancashire and Scotland, Rhyl has become synonymous with deep-rooted deprivation that appears virtually impossible to reverse by 2030. The statistics paint a devastating picture. Multiple deprivation in West and South West Rhyl is among the highest in Wales and encompasses worklessness, low incomes, health inequality, and poor educational outcomes, amongst other things. Unfortunately, Rhyl West 1, Rhyl West 2, and Rhyl South West 2 are identified by the Wales Index of Multiple Deprivation as areas of deep-rooted deprivation. Areas with deep-rooted deprivations are those that have remained within the top 50 most deprived, roughly equal to the top 2.6%. Small areas in Wales for the last 5 publications of YMD ranks. What makes Rhyl's situation particularly hopeless is the structural nature of its decline. The tourism industry that built the town began collapsing in the 1990s. A major factor in the decline of tourism in Rhyl was competition from cheap air travel and package holiday deals, and by the 90s the town had begun to show clear signs of degradation. The spiraling effect of this meant that by 2000 Rhyl West Ward, the area that includes the town centre and the promenade, had topped the Welsh Assembly's first Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation. What makes recovery impossible is the intersection of multiple crises. COVID-19 has devastated an economy already dependent on vulnerable sectors. The National Institute of Economic and Social Research states that destitution, extreme poverty, is projected to be almost 3 times higher in 2022 to 23 than in pre-COVID-19 times, which equates to over an increase of more than 350% in Wales. The demographic trends are equally devastating. Wales faces a broader crisis that Rhyl exemplifies. The trends of population aging and risk of population decline are not unique to Wales. Trends in fertility and mortality in Wales have resulted in an increasing excess of deaths over births since 2015-16. The total fertility rate in Wales fell below the replacement rate of 2.1 in 1974 and has remained there since, standing at just 1.5 births per woman in 2021. Young people are fleeing Wales in general, and Rhyl in particular. A particular factor for Wales, as for Italy, Japan and Scotland, is that when people leave rural areas, they often also leave the country. For example, a Welsh survey finds that while 75% of young people enjoy living in rural Wales, 40% believe that they will have to leave Wales within the next 5 years, even though they would prefer to stay. By 2030, current trajectories suggest Rhyl will either be a completely transformed place demographically, essentially a different community entirely, or face such severe economic and social challenges that normal civic life becomes impossible. The combination of endemic deprivation, youth flight, economic collapse, and health crises creates conditions from which recovery within 5 years is mathematically impossible. Jaywick, if any place in Britain epitomizes the concept of a community beyond redemption, it is Jaywick in Essex. The Essex town, near Clacton-on-Sea, again topped a list that measures deprivation in 32,844 small areas or neighbourhoods across England for the 3rd time in deprivation indices. Built in the 1930s as affordable holiday homes for working-class Londoners, Jaywick represents the complete transformation of hope into despair. Despite being marketed as holiday homes, many of the original houses became permanent residences due to post-war housing shortages in London, and by 1950 there was a significant year-round population. The current statistics reveal a community in complete economic collapse. A 2011 report in The Guardian found that 62% of working-age residents in Jaywick received benefits, compared to 15% of the national average. According to the Citizens Advice Bureau, 40% of residents are unable to work due to a disability or long-term illness. 60% of pupils at Frobisher Primary School, on the edge of the village, receive free school meals. Property values reflect the complete absence of demand or investment confidence. A 2009 report found that 4 out of Eastern England's 10 cheapest streets in which to buy property are in Jaywick, with property on Tamarisk Way selling for an average of £44,050. A 2013 report in The Guardian showed that bungalows were being sold on the Brooklands estate for around £20,000.
Educational outcomes reflect the broader social collapse, with 60% of primary school children receiving free meals, indicating extreme poverty. The foundation for any economic recovery is absent. The cycle of deprivation becomes self-reinforcing when children grow up without the basic educational and social capital necessary to break free. Climate change poses an additional existential threat. Built on low-lying coastal land, Jaywick faces increasing risk from sea level rise and coastal erosion. Do not be surprised to see it top the list of deprivation in 2020, providing that it has not been abandoned to the unforgiving sea before then. By 2030, Jaywick faces 2 equally bleak scenarios: either managed retreat and resettlement of the population elsewhere, or continued decline into a kind of internal refugee camp for Britain's most disadvantaged citizens. Neither scenario involves survival as a functioning community. Merthyr Tydfil's transformation from the iron capital of the world to Wales's most precarious local authority represents one of the most dramatic urban reversals in British history. Most significantly, for its survival prospects, Merthyr Tydfil
was the only local authority in Wales to experience a percentage decrease in population between mid-2022 and mid-2023. The historical context makes this decline particularly stark. Founded on heavy industry, Merthyr became the iron capital of the world and Wales' largest town the early 19th century. The scale of the collapse becomes apparent when considering that in 2022, it had an estimated population of 58,883, making it the smallest local authority in Wales by population. Despite some positive indicators, like house price growth, the fundamental demographics are devastating. In 2021, Merthyr Tydfil local authority area had a 27.9% house price increase over the 12 months of the year, the highest of any of the 22 local authority areas in Wales. However, this likely reflects desperation buying by people priced out elsewhere, rather than genuine economic regeneration. The employment situation reveals deep structural problems. Merthyr Tydfil's unemployment rate is 6.0%. That's 2% higher than the average unemployment rate for Wales as a whole. The main group within the unemployment population is long-term sick, representing 40.6% of the unemployed population. Most critically, for long-term sustainability, the demographic trends are irreversible within the 2030 timeframe. Being the only Welsh local authority experiencing population decline while surrounded by areas with at least stable populations indicates that people are actively choosing to leave Merthyr for nearby alternatives. The council's financial situation adds another layer of crisis. The councils that saw the biggest increases in debt over this period were Torfen 26.8%, Newport 22.34%, and Merthyr Tydfil 21.2%. Cultural indicators also suggest terminal decline. Use of the Welsh language in the town declined significantly in the late 19th and 20th centuries. In the 1891 census, 68.4% of the 110,569 inhabitants habitually spoke Welsh. By the 1911 census, the figure had fallen to 50.9% of 74,596 inhabitants. The 2011 census showed 8.9% primarily speaking Welsh. By 2030, current trends suggest Merthyr will either undergo such dramatic population replacement that it becomes a fundamentally different place, or continue shrinking to the point where maintaining basic services becomes impossible. The combination of population decline, economic stagnation, poor health outcomes, and high unemployment creates a cycle that accelerates rather than self-corrects. Stoke-on-Trent's decline from the world center of ceramics production to a struggling post-industrial city illustrates how quickly global economic forces can destroy centuries of accumulated expertise and infrastructure. While some recovery efforts show promise, the scale of decline suggests survival as a major urban center by 2030 is questionable. The historical scale of the collapse is staggering. Back in the 19th century, the local industry employed more than 100,000 people. Even in 1979, around 52,700 people still worked in the ceramics factories, which dominated the city's industrial landscape. The speed of decline was devastating. This hollowing out had a dramatic effect upon both the local skills base and employment, which fell to around 10,000 in 2008. The physical infrastructure reveals the extent of urban abandonment. The effects on the city were profound. Thousands of jobs were lost as pottery factories either closed down or relocated abroad, leaving behind vast industrial sites that fell into disrepair. Across the city, a similar story is repeated across a citywide canvas. Empty factories, warehouses, and other industrial buildings which have gone south. Many are empty, but in only low-grade disrepair. Others are too far gone, both urban wilderness sanctuaries and totems to the ravages of the long recession. While recent years have shown some stabilization, the current population data suggests continued underlying weakness. Stoke-on-Trent's 2025 population is now estimated at 396,812. In 1950, the population of Stoke-on-Trent was 399,337. The fact that the city has essentially the same population as 75 years ago
despite massive national population growth, indicates persistent problems attracting and retaining residents. Some recovery indicators exist, but remain fragile. Yet since then, employment has stabilized and recently begun to rise as firms have started recruiting again. There is increasing optimism, and the latest data shows that in table and giftware gross value added, which is an indicator of profitability, rose from £125 million to £181 million between 2009 and 2013.
The competitive environment remains brutal. Many famous factories have been struck by difficult times due to the inability to compete with the foreign prices of ceramics, which has consequently led to many layoffs and, in worse cases, factories being forced to close. Royal Doulton announced in February that it was moving its Royal Albert brand to Indonesia, closing one of its 3 remaining Stoke factories and making 500 potters redundant. Most critically, the economic base remains dangerously concentrated in a globally competitive industry with limited growth potential. While some premium production has returned from Asia, this represents niche markets that cannot support a major city's economy. The broader manufacturing base has been permanently lost. The city's polycentric structure compounds governance challenges. A prototypical regeneration project, the biennial spills over into and across the immediate Hanley neighborhood, the default heart of a city that doesn't, as a straggling polycentric composite of the 6 potteries towns, claim an authentic single center. Oldham represents one of the most complex and dangerous demographic transformations occurring in modern Britain. While superficial statistics suggest stability or even growth, deeper analysis reveals a town undergoing such rapid and fundamental demographic replacement that its survival as a recognizable British community by 2030 is highly questionable. The headline population figures mask a devastating underlying reality. Between the last 2 censuses, held in 2011 and 2021, the population of Oldham increased by 7.6%, from around 224,900 in 2011 to around 242,100 in 2021. However, this growth conceals the most dramatic demographic replacement happening anywhere in Britain. The ethnic transformation has been staggering in speed and scale. In the latest census, around 198,900 Oldham residents said they were born in England. This represented 82.2% of the local population. The figure has risen from around 195,100 in 2011, which at the time represented 86.8% of Oldham's population. While the absolute number of English-born residents has increased slightly, their proportion of the total population has fallen dramatically, a clear sign of rapid demographic change through international migration. The Pakistani-born population exemplifies this transformation. Pakistan was the next most represented, with around 12,800 Oldham residents reporting this country of birth 5.3%. This figure was up from just over 9,400 in 2011, which at the time represented 4.2% of the population of Oldham. The number of Oldham residents born in Bangladesh rose from around 6,900 in 2011, 3.1% of the local population, to around 8,000 in 2021, 3.3%. Economic indicators suggest serious underlying problems despite population growth. The unemployment rate in Oldham is 5.5%. The definition of unemployment is being economically active but unemployed. The average unemployment rate nationally is 3.8%. More concerning is the pattern of economic inactivity. Oldham saw England's joint third-largest percentage point rise, alongside Luton and Pendle, in the proportion of people who were economically inactive because they were looking after their family or home, from 5.2% in 2011 to 7.4% in 2021. Educational levels remain significantly below national averages. 10.6% of the people in Oldham have no qualifications. The national average for people with no qualifications is 6.6%. Only 29.6% have an NVQ4 qualification, indicating low levels of higher education and professional skills. The industrial heritage that built Oldham has completely disappeared. At its zenith, it was the most productive cotton spinning mill town in the world, producing more cotton than France and Germany combined. Oldham's textile industry fell into decline in the mid-20th century. The town's last mill closed in 1998. The demise of textile processing in Oldham depressed and heavily affected the local economy. Language patterns indicate deep integration challenges. English is spoken as the main language by 88.7% of people in Oldham, and spoken either well or very well by 6.8% of the population. 3.1% reported having poor English language skills, and the remaining 1.4% spoke no English at all. Most critically for long-term viability, the demographic patterns suggest the emergence of parallel communities rather than integrated ones. Much of Oldham's inhabitants reside in 19th century brick terraced houses, which were constructed to accommodate workers in the town's mills. Different ethnic groups have concentrated in different neighborhoods, creating geographical segregation that makes social cohesion increasingly difficult. By 2030, current trends suggest Oldham will either be a completely transformed place, bearing little resemblance to the historic English town it once was, or face severe social tensions as different demographic groups compete for resources and political influence. The rapid pace of change, the fastest demographic transformation of any major British town, makes gradual adaptation impossible and crisis increasingly likely. Hartlepool represents the precarious situation of a town that has become entirely dependent on a single industry, nuclear power, whose future is both uncertain and ultimately terminal. When Hartlepool nuclear power station closes in 2027, the town faces economic collapse that will likely prove irreversible by 2030. The scale of this dependence is staggering. Adjacent to the east of Terracea is the Hartlepool nuclear power station, an advanced gas-cooled reactor AGR-type nuclear power plant, opened in the 1980s. It is the single largest employer in the town, employing 1% of the town's working-age people. For a single employer to represent 1% of the entire working-age population indicates dangerous economic concentration.
The broader employment picture reveals an economy without alternatives. Engineering-related jobs employ around 1,700 people. Tata Steel Europe employ around 350 people in the manufacture of steel tubes, predominantly for the oil industry. Rhyl. These numbers are insufficient to replace nuclear employment, and both sectors face their own decline pressures. The demographic structure compounds the economic challenges. In Hartlepool, the population size has increased slightly, 0.3%, from around 92,000 in 2011 to 92,300 in 2021. This is lower than the increase for England, 6.6%, where the population grew by nearly 3.5 million to 56,489,800. The town is effectively stagnant, while the country grows around it. The extension of plant life to 2027 provides only temporary respite. The power station was originally expected to shut down in 2009, but was given permission by the Nuclear Installations Inspectorate (NIO) for an extension of 5 years in 2007, meaning that it could continue to generate until 2014. Multiple extensions have followed, but each brings the final closure date closer. Geographic isolation compounds the challenges. A severe decline in heavy industries and shipbuilding following the Second World War caused periods of high unemployment until the 1990s, when major investment projects and the redevelopment of the docks area into the Hartlepool marina saw a rise in the town's prospects. However, these improvements were modest and cannot compensate for nuclear closure. The skilled workforce represents both an asset and a vulnerability. It would also mean Hartlepool would have lost hundreds of highly skilled nuclear professionals, folks who have skills vital to the future of the UK's energy industry, not just because they are nuclear, but because the nuclear industry works hard on developing its people. While these workers have valuable skills, their expertise is specific to a declining industry, and most will need to relocate to find equivalent employment. Port Talbot represents the most dramatic industrial death spiral in modern Britain, where the closure of the UK's largest steelworks has created an irreversible economic catastrophe that will devastate the town by 2030. The scale of this collapse goes far beyond simple job losses. It represents the end of an entire civilization built around steel production. The economic devastation is already underway. In January 2024, Tata Steel announced it would shut down both blast furnaces, citing unsustainable losses and the need to modernize. The company confirmed that up to 2,800 jobs would be cut across the UK, with around 2,500 of those losses in Port Talbot. Since then, hundreds of workers have already left, either through voluntary redundancy, early retirement, or compulsory layoffs, with the first blast furnace already closed by autumn 2024. The multiplier effects will be catastrophic. It is estimated that the knock-on effect will see 12,000 jobs lost. Such is the reliance in the supply chain on the steel plant remaining open. The Tata workforce at Port Talbot accounts for 12% of the Welsh coastal town's entire population. When more than 1/10 of an entire town works for a single employer, its closure doesn't just cause unemployment. It causes community collapse. The historical precedent shows how quickly such closures destroy communities. Economics professor Calvin Jones of Cardiff University termed Tata Steel the most economically important private sector company in Wales. The population of Port Talbot soared over the course of the 1950s as people flocked to the town for the promise of high-paying jobs, catered meals and 5-day work weeks. This prosperity earned the burgeoning town the nickname of Treasure Island, after the Robert Louis Stevenson novel. Cultural identity is inextricably linked to steel production. The past, present and future of Port Talbot are inextricably tied to steel, so much so that the town has even been described as a miniature steel city. Without Port Talbot steelworks, there's no Port Talbot. The knock-on effect will be catastrophic. Businesses will go bankrupt. It's not just the steelworks, it's the lorry industry, the corner shop, newspaper shops, hairdressers. By 2030, Port Talbot faces becoming a post-industrial wasteland. The promise of green technology jobs cannot compensate for the loss of thousands of well-paid manufacturing positions. Young people will emigrate, property values will collapse, and the town will join Blackpool, Rhyl and Jaywick as another casualty of Britain's managed industrial decline. Corby represents the most dangerous combination of industrial collapse and environmental catastrophe facing any British town. While statistical manipulation suggests success, the reality is a community poisoned by decades of toxic waste mismanagement, facing demographic displacement, and dependent on artificial growth that cannot be sustained beyond 2030. The environmental disaster casts a shadow over everything. The Corby chemical disaster refers to a prolonged period of environmental contamination and its severe health consequences in Corby, Northamptonshire, England. During the demolition and redevelopment of the site, hazardous materials, including toxic chemicals, heavy metals, and carcinogenic compounds were improperly handled and dispersed into the environment. In a landmark legal case in 2009, a High Court ruling found Corby Borough Council liable for negligence in handling the demolition and waste disposal process. The human cost has been devastating. Over time, alarming health patterns began to emerge. In the early 2000s, a group of families noticed an abnormally high rate of birth defects and disabilities in children born in Corby. Studies linked these abnormalities to toxic exposure from the steelworks waste mismanagement. The story has now been adapted into a major Netflix drama, Toxic Town, described as Britain's answer to Erin Brockovich. The current population figures mask demographic instability. In 2021, it had a population of 68,164. At the 2021 census, the former borough had a population of 75,571. As of 2010, had the fastest growing population in England and Wales. However, this growth is artificial and unsustainable, driven by government policy rather than economic fundamentals. These 10 towns are not anomalies. They are previews of Britain's future unless fundamental changes occur. The same forces destroying them, demographic decline, economic polarization, infrastructure decay, climate change, political abandonment, affect much of the country outside London and a few other successful cities.
By 2030, many more communities will face similar existential crises. The question is not whether these 10 towns will survive in recognizable form. They won't, but whether Britain will learn from their fate or continue the policies that created it. The mathematics of managed decline are inexorable. Without massive, sustained intervention that current political and economic structures make impossible, these communities will join the historical list of places that once mattered but no longer exist. Their fate represents not just local tragedies, but the canary in the coal mine for a nation that has forgotten how to value the places and people who built it.